Awesome. So for today's session, we're going to be talking about returning to the workplace and how do we earn employee trust back while operating efficiently. For this session, we really want to start taking a look at what's been happening lately. We've had some stops and starts. We've had some different things when it comes to returning to the office. And we want to talk around what's worked and what's not when ensuring a safe and healthy return to the office. And also look at some of those future trends for that are going to impact real estate facilities teams in the future and how we can build out those plans. So, I think first and foremost, what I would love to do is David, Kelly, and Matt, have you guys introduce yourselves, give a little bit of background on yourselves, and then we'll get into the questions. And so, David, maybe we start with you, kind of doing an introduction.
Yeah, happy to jump right in, Chris. Thank you. So I'm David McGuinness, Head of Business Development at OpenPath. If you're not familiar with our company, we are a physical access control technology platform. We are a little different than most of our competitors in that we leverage native cloud computing, the power of mobile, and really mobile first, in addition to supporting cards, and then an open platform in terms of integrations with other, really innovative prop tech platforms like Crowd Comfort, for example. So thanks for having us, Chris. Looking forward to the discussion today.
Fantastic. And Kelly, can you give a little bit of background?
Hi, Chris. Thank you. My name is Kelly Cologne. I am the Director of Workplace Strategy. I work for Cresa out of the Boston office, and Cresa is a tenant-only representative firm. So we work with just tenants and all of their real estate and portfolio needs. I myself work with our clients, basically leveraging my background in facilities and operations and management to help them identify customized solutions that allow them to operate more efficiently. Thank you for having us.
Great. And Matt, you want to close us out here?
Yeah, happy to hit clean up here. Thanks for having me, Chris. Really appreciate you putting the event together. I'm Matt Giffune. I'm one of the co-founders of Occupier. We are a lease management software platform for tenants and tenant rep brokers. We provide lease administration, transaction management, and lease accounting software in an end-to-end lifecycle management solution. We do that for both office and retail occupiers. We're about a 3-year-old company. Prior to that, I spent time at BTS, which is another large prop tech company on the landlord side, and I was a broker at JLL here in Boston for about 10 years. Fantastic.
Great. Well, we've done in our dry run earlier. I know you guys have a wealth of knowledge, a lot of insight, so I'm really excited about today. So before we get started, when we get asked kind of the question, before we get into kind of the nitty gritty of what the future holds, let's take a look at what happened over the last 12 to 18 months. I know we had some, stops and starts. A lot of the prospects and customers we've talked to had some return to office dates consistently get pushed back. We've had, a few different variants come up with, different levels of concern. But let's start talking about kind of where organizations are today, what's worked, what's not, and what's kind of like top of mind as we think about the return to the office. So, Kelly, I know, why don't we start with you? I know you guys work with a lot of different industries, and they're all kind of taking different approaches to getting back in person. So can you give us a little bit of background on kind of what that looks like?
Sure. I think generally speaking, there's still a voluntary return to the office as sort of a universal guidance. I think many industries and sectors, and certainly clients that we're working with, that's their primary solution, is sort of a voluntary return to office as they continue to evaluate and monitor the pandemic and the variants that are coming up in different parts of the world. And so I think that tends to be the general theme, is that it's really on a voluntary basis. I think the sector that we see that is not really voluntary outside of first responders is really in higher ed. And so in the higher ed market, a lot of our clients and students are in fact back in the classroom full-time all the time with some very stringent guidelines at this time.
Got it. Yeah, and that makes sense too. I think a lot of the value of higher ed is being in person, right? Obviously you're learning a lot of things, but being able to make those connections. Is there anything that we can take from them that you see them doing that a corporate occupier might take to heart?
Well, I think a lot of the protocols that are in place in a higher ed, certainly that we've seen locally in the Boston market, is weekly testing, mandated vaccination statuses, mandated masking in enclosed areas, still a driver for social distancing when possible. But really, I think it's a vigilance in trying to be mindful about how they're engaging. When you're doing group projects in a classroom, it's a different mindset that both faculty, administration, and students are having to leverage on a day-to-day basis that they hadn't really thought about before.
Got it. Oh, that's great. And then David, I know you are getting a lot of really interesting data on, from landlords, from occupiers, in actually starting to make flexible work, right? What's your experience been? What have you seen those folks do when it comes to return to the office?
Yeah, no, thanks for a good question, and thanks for kind of queuing it up for both the landlords and the occupiers. So we have the benefit that we work with both as customers, and in many cases in the common building working together. So what we've seen, obviously over the last 20 months was the first focus was how the heck do I get productive at home? And hopefully the expectation was, it was a 30, 60, 90-day inconvenience, which is just, it's been never ending since. So the first focus around technology was around safety and wellness, right? So ensuring that as the investment in cleaning spaces and reporting upon when those spaces were cleaned, that was available to everyone. So that transparency of data and communication, but then also ensuring that we were keeping people that could be a risk of infection, keeping them out of the office environment, right? And so that was through wellness checks, self-attestation questionnaires, even temperature screening, and then based upon sort of the results of either of those two types of approaches, it would activate your credentials so you could get in every day. We also saw a huge investment in prop tech, and I'm sure Matt and Kelly can speak to this as well, where the pandemic, if nothing else, opened everyone's eyes to the fact that there's a true value in prop tech. It's not just a curiosity. It's something that now becomes table stakes. So that was wonderful to be a participating player in that uptake, and it continues on at a really aggressive or accelerating rate. We're seeing more of a focus, as you mentioned, Chris, on today on flexibility, right? So we know, at the end of this pandemic cycle, it's probably unlikely we're all going to be back in the office 5 days a week. We've proven that we can be productive, remotely. We may not always want to take on that commute to the headquarters or the downtown, central business district location. And so we want the ability to choose where we work, when we work, or where we work and when that is. And so we're seeing more and more technology investment around that, and happy to kind of jump into that in more detail, but I want to make sure that Matt's got some time here as well.
Great.
Yeah, I can piggyback off that on the prop tech adoption part, because we've been fortunate to be, in a somewhat uncomfortable position of benefiting from the COVID effects, because to your point, Dave, like most companies were just caught completely unprepared to make real estate decisions as a result of the pandemic's restrictions that got put on real estate, right? So if you were an office occupier, overnight you had to figure out how to manage a completely remote workforce. The reverberations come down to your balance sheet because you're spending all this money on rent. How do I actually start to mitigate some of the bleeding there? If I don't have access to my leases and my information and know the proper steps to take in my portfolio, then it's just going to take me a lot of time, and I'm going to stumble through my decisions. We saw this on the retail side as well, where a lot of our customers suddenly had to shut down stores, and those are the lifeblood of their business because that's what makes them money. So how do you negotiate rent relief with your landlords? How do you understand the provisions in your leases that allow you to shut down the space but not have to lose too much money in the process or get into big legal disputes with your landlords and your providers? So yeah, we saw a huge adoption of people who just wanted to get better organized around their existing portfolio information. And I think where it's going is that now that people have kind of been awoken to the need to understand their data, you're going to see a lot more adoption of prop tech solutions like ours and others, whether that's occupancy tracking, whether it's desk management for the hybrid work force and stuff like that. And eventually, hopefully, all these things will converge into one place where, you're giving the occupier a much better kind of platform through which to make decisions from a software perspective. As far as activities in the markets go, like we see office still kind of struggling to pick up. Obviously, for all the things that Kelly and Dave mentioned, it's harder to get people to come back to work right now. But on the data side, it's actually creating much more need for tools, because now companies need not only to track their headquarters office space, but satellite locations, people working from home. There's just more information and more decision endpoints. On the retail side, we're actually seeing a ton of growth. These companies are now kind of emerging from the real dark days of the pandemic. And then there's other sectors like micro fulfillment sectors and warehouses that are certainly picking up as well.
Got it. And so let's dig a little bit deeper on the data side. I know, that's one area where I think everybody has more data than they probably could use. But I think also when we look at prop tech or CRE and corporate real estate, typically they've been laggards when it comes to technology and some of the data elements, mainly because they didn't have a lot of competition for the office. Because everybody was going in. So, David, I know you kind of alluded to it before, but like, what are some of the things you're seeing on data side and a decision-making side that's been really fruitful during the pandemic and will be fruitful kind of as we look forward?
Yeah, so with access control as a technology platform, it really serves a solid foundation for capturing data or understanding who's coming into a property, when they're coming, where they're going. So I would say the first thing is around unique tenant or occupiers that come to a particular office or come to a particular building, right? And so within the office, you just want to know, how many people are coming in on a daily basis, when they're arriving, right? When they might be departing. And that can inform you both in terms of space planning, as well as through cleaning, right? Like when's the optimal time for sanitizing or deep cleaning spaces. If you're a landlord, you might care about not only the building occupancy, but you might care about on a per tenant basis, right? So I don't necessarily need to know that Matt arrived today or he was in the office any days this week, but certainly knowing how many unique employees of Occupier are at the property, that would be informative. If you're looking at across multiple office locations, all of this data is also useful, and you might care to know when I'm in our Culver City office versus when I'm in an Orange County office versus when I'm in a San Diego office, right? Depending upon what makes the most sense for me on a particular day. So that's something that that we get asked about quite frequently. We also, by virtue of having really delivered this unique touchless mobile experience for access control, where I can keep my phone in my pocket and simply wave my hand at a reader to unlock an entry point, it's really driven an exceptionally high adoption rate, where we have over 90% of our end users use a mobile device to unlock doors instead of using a card, but you can do it interchangeably. But one of the derivative benefits of using mobile is that our readers serve as beacons. And so we can actually pick up and detect people when they're around an entry point. And that doesn't seem like it's that important until you realize or think about, well, a building is typically unlocked during business hours, Monday through Friday, right? So if it's unlocked during business hours, how the heck do I know how many people are coming in if they don't have to use a card to unlock that door? And that's where our technology, we call it our presence data, is able to be useful as a useful source both to the tenant, the occupier, right, as well as to the landlord, because now you really have a means of capturing unique occupants where they are, right? And so that could be a useful source of data to start other like what if models or analysis of how do we plan better for tomorrow.
Yeah, and I know we've talked to a number of our customers, we've talked to prospects on the corporate side, and it was those organizations that had that data already that were able to make much quicker decisions as the pandemic was unfolding. And so, I think there's, a lot there. And I know, Kelly, you were talking about a lot of the people you're talking to around just like, how do we adopt technology quickly? Especially during this. What has your experience been in those conversations?
Well, I think, as hybrid continues to sort of drive the conversation and a migration away from fixed workplace one-to-one seating, people are understanding that they need that kind of data. They need the utilization data. They need the booking data to be able to support, a very agile, activity-based workforce. And so for those that may have been hesitant pre-pandemic, it was one of those things, yes, we need that data. We understand the value of it. Now they're understanding the criticality of, if we don't have that data, we cannot plan for what will happen in, say, 6, 8, 10 months. And so a lot of folks are seeking guidance over, what kinds of technologies are best suited for whatever strategy they're trying to implement in their particular organizations. So we're seeing a lot of interest. And then once solutions are found, there's a real desire to ramp that solution up very quickly so they can start to extract that data and utilize it in a pretty effective way.
And Matt, I know you mentioned a little bit about leasing. What are some of the interesting use cases of, once you have that digitized, what are people using with it? I'm sure there's a lot of people evaluating their properties currently and evaluating their footprints.
Yeah, I mean, you can't evaluate data that you don't have. So at its basis form, what our software platform allows you to do is just understand your current portfolio. I think there was a Deloitte study out there that 68% of companies still manage their lease data in paper leases, so PDFs and Word documents that have been signed with wet signatures and sitting in a Dropbox folder somewhere. It's at scale, it's almost impossible to understand how your portfolio is performing if you're not organizing that information in a central place. So what we're building at Occupier is essential infrastructure software for a business. So if you look at a company, they have a CRM, they have a Salesforce for their sales team, they have a Workday for their HR team, they have ServiceNow for their IT team. But the real estate department has always been underserved with technology. Yes, it's a laggard kind of old school industry, but I think COVID has kind of hit everyone over the head saying like, wow, this is like typically our second largest expense. We should probably understand the data that makes up our portfolio. I mean, you wouldn't keep all your sales contracts in a Dropbox folder. So some of the use cases are just as basic as understanding critical dates in my portfolio. I think there's a use case where like West Elm, the furniture company, had a 1 million square foot distribution center in New Jersey. They missed a renewal option. The rent went up $1 a foot over a 15-year lease and ended up costing the company $15 million over that period of time. That's a very basic date in a lease that could go overlooked if you're not tracking it, right? And if you are tracking it and you're on top of these things, then you can build all sorts of workflows that allow you to make those better decisions. So when you're starting to aggregate the information, you can glean insights from it and start to make more automated, proactive decisions throughout the entire life cycle of occupancy. And that's, the deal management where you can bring your tenant rep broker into the to a software framework to help accelerate a deal process, right? That, access to better market information could be stored in a system. So from a leasing perspective, like you can't measure what you don't have. So step one is to make sure that you're aggregating your data in a kind of easy to use, lightweight way. And then building from there, having that foundation allows people to act quicker, be more informed, and pivot, especially in today's world where people still don't know exactly what that kind of end result of the post-COVID workplace is going to be.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good spot to kind of transition into what that future looks like. I know everybody's kind of mentioned flexible work and not being in the office, 2 to 3 days a week versus the traditional 4 or 5. And so when we look at that new future, I think that has a lot of impacts, not only on the experiences we provide within the office, which we've kind of talked about some of that, but also how do we actually serve those experiences, right? That changes a big nature on the fundamentals there. And so, as we're, thinking about that and maybe, Kelly, you can start there, but what are you seeing with the shift to flexible work and its impact on how do we actually, start to staff and manage?
Well, I think, what we're seeing and what we anticipate continuing to see is this recalibration of space. right? And so migrating from what we once had to a more hospitality focused, something that was more conducive to socialization and collaboration, seeing environments that support that. In addition to that, we're seeing a lot of more discussions around mental health and how are we supporting employees, not just in the spaces and the places that we're providing them to work, but what does that translate into when it comes to productivity and mental health? How are we supporting employees in the office and at home as they manage and juggle these different environments?
Yeah, it's kind of a really interesting problem with that. Now, David, what are you seeing in terms of the usage of data and tracking? I know you kind of mentioned some different things that people are doing with utilization and adoption, but what other things are really kind of interesting use cases as we think to provide better experiences?
Yeah, so we're seeing it's around that theme of flexibility for employees, and it's really how you attract the best talent and how you retain it, right? So first and foremost, I think that the shine on working from home forever probably is wearing off for most. You miss that socialization, as Kelly mentioned. You miss the collaboration. You miss the spontaneity, right, and the learning that you get just by being face to face with your teammates. So that is a good thing. That's sort of the counter lever to I'm going to work from home forever. But what we're seeing from occupiers, from our big tenant customers, and then also from landlords, is this idea or this realization of you kind of have to meet the employee where they want to be. So we have some of our tenant customers that might have, let's just say they're have multiple offices in around the San Francisco Bay Area. So there might be one in downtown San Francisco. There might be one in San Jose. There might be one in Walnut Creek. And because people are spread throughout that metropolitan area, on any given day, my home headquarter location might be San Francisco, but if I live in the East Bay, some days it might just be easier for me to go to Walnut Creek, right? So I want that ability to reserve space, right? Dynamically turn on my credentials so I can pull into parking, so I can get into the building perimeter, so I can get up the elevator, so I can get into our space. And most importantly, know that I have workspace reserved. So that's one thing. And then maybe 1 or 2 days a week, I go to San Francisco. The other thing that we're finding is once you get to that office location, depending upon the organization, they may be controlling capacity, right? They might be extending the concept of social distancing into the office space. And I know at OpenPath, we're doing that currently with Omicron, just in response to that, right? So that everyone feels, getting back to the mental health, but also just true wellness, everyone feels safe and confident that they'll be okay when they go in the office. So if you go in and you've got reserved space, but you don't feel comfortable, like, there's maybe too many people for me, the ability to flex into available space in the building itself. Right. And so we're starting to see that sort of innovative approach from landlords, and even the ability to use adjacent buildings. Right. So if I'm a landlord and I own multiple buildings in close proximity, I might have someone in building 1 who maybe wants to use a conference room, but only building 3 has them available. So they can book and get to that. So we're starting to see that as well. And then the last piece of it is, it's not a landlord specifically, but it's co-working. Right. So employers are looking at, hey, the concept of flex space is valid. The need for improved working infrastructure, better than what you can get at your house, might be something that's important. So start to look at co-working space that's approximate to like a concentration of where employees live. So now I have an easy commute. Maybe it's 10 minutes away from me, and I like to do that more than the hour commute into the city. So curious from Matt's perspective, kind of how you're talking to customers and really what you're observing in the data.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen month-over-month growth in deal activity in our platform since the beginning of the pandemic. Well, since the emergence out of the darkest days of the pandemic back in the spring and winter of 2020. I think all those points are 100% spot on. The idea that there is going to be this spoken hub or hybrid, kind of makeup of your portfolio only actually creates more activity for a real estate team, right? Because now you're you're managing whatever has to be managed, access control, furniture, workplace for that San Francisco headquarters. But then you have WeWork locations all over the country where you're hiring remote workers, and now you have to have an agreement with them. So you're constantly churning through decisions in your portfolio. So we've just seen a lot more deal activity as it relates to new leasing. Whether that's an indication yet of like the office market reemerging is yet to be seen, but it certainly creates more churn. I can also speak from like our point of view as a company at Occupier. We're approaching 30 people right now. We're still a startup, but we almost doubled in size during the pandemic, and most of the people that we hired were remote. So as executive leadership in the company, we have a hub here in Boston and we have a hub in New York City, but we have people in Southern California, Northern California, Utah, St. Louis, Latin America. So real estate is less than a kind of like a fixed idea anymore. And it's more about how does your portfolio, if you will, support your workers. And then you look on the retail side, we've seen an explosion in deal activity in our platform, quick service retail, franchises, emerging concept retailers. They're all bullish right now. So Shake Shack is a customer of ours as an example. They're doubling their footprint over the next 2 to 3 years. And so that kind of manifests itself in our product because you get brokers who are super busy on deals. You get real estate people who are flying around the country, opening up new spaces. So I think it kind of feels like we're like on the slow arc to getting back to normal, but it's really uncertain what normal is going to look like, especially on the office side.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I know you guys brought up decentralization. I know we've had conversations on that where, a lot of times like facilities teams, they're having a hard time because they can't walk the floor to find issues anymore. And so how do we staff, how do we manage that, especially with a distributed workforce is a real issue that they're trying to figure out, right? How to clue into that stuff. So let's transition a little bit and let's look a little bit forward. We have about 10 minutes here, and then we'll get into some Q&A. And for anybody listening that has any questions for the group, the Q&A button's right towards the bottom. So definitely ask those questions and we'll get to those. So as we go forward, and think about the biggest things we've learned from here, and also how does technology and data, how can we help to like mitigate some of the things that we've learned that have been challenges? Matt, maybe you can kick us off on, what do you see kind of the future of how we leverage technology, change as we move forward?
Yeah, there's been a boom in prop tech for the last, call it 10 to 12 years. A lot of that investment has come on the landlord side of the business, the physical property side. So if we focus in on the occupiers, I think it's more imperative now than ever that they start to look at prop tech solutions. I mean, prop tech is a broad term, but the fundamental function of the real estate department within a business is to support the growth of the enterprise, right? And if you're an office, if you're a software company or an insurance company or a biotech company, you're trying to create great workplaces for your people. If you're a retailer, you're trying to optimize revenue on a per location basis. If you're a warehouse operator, a third-party logistics company, you're trying to optimize for speed of delivery and efficiency of your operations. So unless you're actually using technology to measure those things, it's going to be really hard for you to understand like where you are. So I think from the future perspective, if you look at a platform like ours, we have a database that allows you to understand all of your lease obligations and financials, and we automate as much workflow around that. What we're going to be looking to do in the future is start to integrate other data sources into that. So if I'm an occupier like Google and I have thousands of locations and thousands of employees, I may look to integrate my OpenPath data into my real estate platform so I can say, look, here's my real estate portfolio, here's my upcoming obligations, my headcount, my utilization, but also understand like who's actually coming into the office, and that will drive more accurate, quicker decisions. Like if we're starting to come into this world of like millions of point solutions for all of these little aspects of how you manage your real estate decisions, and at some point they will converge. So we see the future being, the the marrying of all of the stakeholders within the business, whether that's the finance team, the real estate team, the workplace team, the IT team, everybody is going to need to understand their own world, but also at the executive level, how that stuff impacts like strategy going forward. So I think there's just going to be a more rapid adoption rate of property tech solutions, especially on the occupier side, which has been pretty underserved for the last, call it 20 years.
Yeah, no, I agree. And Kelly, I know you've seen kind of as a big trend is more on the employee side, and how they interact. So can you share that now?
So I think you're going to see a lot more focus on that employee experience, and as that translates into sort of Dave's earlier point around feeling safe and secure from a health and wellness perspective. And so technologies to support when I go into a specific location, have there been any direct COVID or pandemic, challenges? When was the last time that, the space has been cleaned? A lot of those things that were happening from a facilities perspective behind the scenes are now becoming really a requirement for employees to feel safe and secure in the environment. When was the last maintenance on HVAC systems, things of that nature, and providing that level of data and transparency directly down to the employee level to help foster that experience where they can feel like they're coming to the workplace that is going to provide them a safe and secure environment to do their work.
Yeah, I was watching a presentation the other day, probably about a month or two ago, and to David's point, one of the big takeaways was the lack of in-person involvement and actually seeing other people that a lot of employees were having, and how community is a big part of our mental health. And I think we're seeing a lot of people do surveys and try to keep in touch with that. And I think that's going to be it's kind of opened a lot of people's eyes to it, and it's going to be something that stays with us. Yep. And David, I know there's like some really interesting stuff of like, I think we're just skimming the surface of the power of the data that we have within our facilities.
Yeah, and it all starts, so the transparency of information and data that Kelly was talking about, that's all really being focused and delivered through mobile applications, right? So sort of the 3D-ification of real estate now, where there's a digital aspect to it, right? And that's a new way of delivering an amenity or an experience, to the occupiers. And that's the same for employers to their employees, right? Being able to now have a single channel, right, where everything flows through, and everything that I would need to do, I can do through a single application. I don't have to check emails and texts and Slack channels to get the information I need. It's all delivered in one neat package for me. So that's one thing that we're certainly seeing, and that's all about engagement, right? And it's all about, again, making people feel like they're informed so they can make the right decisions for themselves. And so once you have those mobile applications, and Crowd Comfort's a great example of that. You had mentioned as in the interim between the sessions, HQO is one of the sponsors here. They do a phenomenal job from a tenant experience perspective. And then you have to start to measure, right? How engaging, how sticky is that experience, right? And so that's where you look at adoption rates, and then more importantly, utilization rates, I would say. So that, are people taking advantage of that technology? And if they are, it then becomes, a treasure trove of data, right? Data that is informative to ESG teams, right? So now you can start to get a sense of, when are buildings or spaces occupied? What are the sort of the peak and the valley times and days of the week? Because that can help you, with different things, whether it's savings or whether it's cleanings or whether it's, ensuring that fresh air is coming through. So that's one thing. I would say you're also looking at asset management is interested in that, right? The health, the performance, or the real estate teams of tenants, of occupiers. They're looking at that, right? Are we making the right investments, and the investments that we've made, are we getting a proper ROI? I think you're also looking at, developers, right? If I can start to track like, hey, we spent a lot of money, or we put a lot of value into a particular amenity area, and we're finding that that's not getting traction, do we really want to repeat that in our next development project? Or is there something that really outperformed our expectations? And we say, you know what, we got to do more of that in the next project, right? So let's not spend the money where we're getting minimal traction. Let's really go double down on the stuff that really has an impact. So, it all comes back to data, just like Matt and Kelly were talking about. And I think it all becomes harnessed through mobile.
Great. And so we have about 7 minutes left. And so we do have one question. We'll get to that after this. But if you do have any questions, use the Q&A tab on Zoom. But why don't we do, kind of a final takeaway, maybe a minute from everybody of just, what are the things that somebody should be focused on, right? If we're focused on one thing, what is the thing that we should be focused on kind of going forward? And why don't we go Matt, we'll go Kelly, and then David, you end us out.
Sure. I think the main thing for real estate decision makers to focus on is aligning the different stakeholders in your business around a central source of information and truth. At least from our perspective, where we've seen the negative impacts of COVID accelerating the adoption of software like ours. If you're going to adopt a piece of software that helps surface information and provide workflows for your real estate, make sure that every stakeholder in the business is involved in that decision, or at least has access, because alignment is really key. Because as Kelly said, it all comes down to the employee, right? You have to make sure that everything that you're doing benefits your ultimate stakeholder, which is the people that are working at your company. So I think it's incumbent on leaders in the business to make sure that everybody that has a stake in the real estate information, has access to it and has a seat at the table.
Kelly?
I think, it's a reminder for everyone that none of us have gone through this before. And we've all done certain facets of work pertaining to this, but there isn't really anyone alive today that has gone through something like this, right? And so this is a sustained, global, traumatic, society impacting event. And so understanding the foundation of where we are so that we can build something off of that and just try something, listening to your employees, understanding what they need, what your organization needs, and to Matt's point, marrying those two pieces together so that you can build something that is functional. And the last thing I will say is there is no repeatable formula. What works for one organization may not actually work for another. And so it really is finding a customized solution for each individual organization.
And David?
Yeah, so I'll just try to not repeat what Kelly and Matt have said. So, to me, I think one of the lessons that we've learned is the response to getting people back to work continues to change, right? It went from safety and wellness to flexibility. Safety and wellness is tucking back in because of Omicron, and it'll continue to evolve. So as we talk to occupier customers and landlord customers, really what we start to hear more commonly is, how do you choose the right technologies, right prop tech, operational technologies to put in place? And it seems like there's really three characteristics that always sort of surface. So number one is cloud-based seems to be the right approach because it enables you to be much more nimble. You can update things in near real time, and you can make those updates from anywhere, right? You're not managing a piece of computational equipment in a basement somewhere. Second thing is mobile, right? And the importance of that digital experience becomes really important. There's an aspect of touchless, there's an aspect of transparency, and unification of sort of all capabilities in a single app becomes really important. And I think the third is it's got to be an open, API platform, something that makes it easy to plug systems together and for them to share data. So just as Matt was saying, it might be interesting to make an API call to get occupancy data from OpenPath. And maybe you get real-time events from us. Yeah, you should be able to do that, right? And so that's might not be important to you as an organization at this present moment. It might not be something that's important to you in 2022, but guarantee you want to plan for it, because in 2023, it might be something you go, shoot, we need that, and we made the wrong bet. So now we got to rip something out and put something else in. So I think if you can rally around those three sort of attributes and help that with your decision making, I think that's an important step towards future-proofing, your organization.
Cool. No, that's great. And thank you so much for taking the time, guys. We'll get into questions here now. And if anybody else has any questions, please do that. We have a few questions here. So the first question was 65% of workers fear returning to the office, and 75 workers are willing to quit their job if their employers have not done enough to prevent the spread of COVID in the workplace. How is technology being used for peace of mind in returning workers? I know, Kelly, you mentioned that before, but Matt and David, feel free to jump on as well.
So I think we're seeing a lot of technology rolling into, and Crowd Comfort does a lot of this as well, tying into cleaning protocols and KPIs, how often things are cleaned, putting that into a dashboard and a metric so that people can understand what that space is, when that was last cleaned, that kind of data, and that integration of facilities data back into a dashboard that is digestible by an employee is going to become really critical.
Got it. And David and Matt, we can get to our next question, but if you had any answer there.
Not an expert there.
Cool.
Yeah, go ahead. The only thing I recognize is, people are they're interested in, how safe is it to be next to one of my colleagues? And so it comes down to, if there's a mandate on vaccination to return to work, like New York is just passed in the city, or if there's, I need to do that self-attestation every day, just like I do when I get on a plane or jump in an Uber, right? I've just got to self-verify that I'm okay.
Yep.
So that's, those are the only things you can do.
Seeing a lot of solutions like that make it really simple to do that. And one last question, and then we'll let you guys go. We had a question around David's point around kind of interoperability, and what are some of the really interesting ways organizations are combining data, and Matt, maybe you have something there. Kelly, maybe you have something quick there. And David, maybe you start.
Sure. So, for us, it's like the building blocks that we're typically deployed with from an access control, from a mobile access control standpoint, is certainly a tenant or an employer experience app, right? So now having a mobile credential in that same app, so it's a single pane of glass that I have to master as an end user. That might tie into feeding HVAC systems, right? So the ability now to optimize my comfort in a building, certainly tying that into maybe parking, right? I see most people today, when they're going into the office, the days that they do, they're not necessarily interested in public transportation, right? They're still not quite over the hump on that. So they're driving, right? Or maybe they're taking a ride share. But if you're driving, you need to get access into a garage. So that's part of it, tying into the garage system or the parking management system. And then we're seeing visitors, right? That becomes another constituent that has an impact on safety and wellness in a space. So the ability to make sure that you can grant access to a visitor, but only when they pass go, which is, they have to clear some level of wellness verification. I'll leave it to Matt and Kelly to kind of round out the responses here.
Yeah, I think it really just depends on your business and what you're trying to measure. So if you're looking at a system like ours that is your kind of command center for your real estate portfolio, you might want to make API calls to your space management system, your access control system. If you're a retailer, you might want to make an API call to your POS system to get sales related data layered against your rent roll. So I think it really just depends on what the company is trying to solve for. But again, to my point earlier, I think there will be a convergence of these data sources, especially with cloud-based solutions. It's pretty easy to tap in to other systems as long as you kind of have that system of record already established within your business.
Okay, you want to round us out?
I just, all of those points are valid. And I also just sort of want to caution that, you want to measure what matters. So to Matt's point, it's reflective of each organization. So you want to make sure that you're not just measuring it to the getting some data just to have data. It really needs to have an impact to the org. And so it's customized to that particular entity.
Perfect. Well, I know I learned a lot from the panel. So thank you so much for taking the time to do that. As I mentioned, this is was being recorded, so we'll share this with everybody if they want to kind of go back, listen to the answers back again. But thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Great.
Take care.